Welcome to another episode of the PFF College Football Show. Max Chadwick alongside Dalton Wasserman here to break down my top 10 returning tight ends in college football entering the 2025 season. And Dalton, we just had two tight ends go in the top 15 of this year's draft, and Kosol Loveland and Tyler Warren. Might not get a first-round tight end next year, but this is still a very intriguing list. And actually, 5 of my top tight ends in the country transferred this offseason. So a lot of movement in my top 10 list. I'm really excited to break it down with you.
Well, it's interesting because going into last year, we knew that Kosol Loveland was probably going to be a first-round pick, even with the quarterback situation at Michigan. We knew he was going to have a big year. But you know what? Tyler Warren was a guy we did not think would hit that level and be basically the best tight end in the country. So you never know who's going to break out at this position. A lot of times it could just take a really good athlete that finds the right situation, hence the transfers, right? And just somebody who can find, or hits that stage in his development, right? Sometimes tight ends take a little longer with all the responsibilities. So any one of these guys could break out and hit that level. We don't necessarily know before the season. We just don't have a Colston Loveland or a Brock Bowers where we're like, hey, top 10 to 15 player in the country going into this. So it'll be a lot of fun to search out as the season goes on which one of these guys could break out like Warren did.
Absolutely. It's a wide open list right now. I want to remind you guys that all of these lists are available at pff.com. If you want to go read the articles, you have every single position out already. And of course, all of these lists are made using PFF exclusive stats, and you can also have with a PFF Plus subscription. So go to subscribe.pff.com today to get access to all of those stats and make your own top 10 tight ends list. All right, let's start off with my honorable mention tight end. That is R.J. Maryland from SMU. He kind of looked like one of the best tight ends in the nation before torn ACL ended his 2024 year after only 7 games. He averaged 2.7 yards per route run. That trailed only Harold Fannin Jr. and Tyler Warren among FBS tight ends last year. And despite missing half a season, R.J. Maryland still has nearly 900 receiving yards over the last 2 years, the 7th most among all returning tight ends in college football. Still plenty of room to improve as a blocker right now. He's kind of more of a receiving tight end, a little bit skinnier body as well. He earned a 55.9 run blocking grade this past year, but he should be the favorite target for Kevin Jennings, who was one of my top 10 quarterbacks in college football, my top 10 quarterback list. So go check that out. But R.J. Maryland, really intriguing pass catcher who was a really good receiving tight end.
Yeah, for sure. He's one of the most important pieces of this SMU offense, especially coming back this year in a year when Brashard Smith went to the NFL. They lost some of their other top receivers, and you could tell there was a bit in the middle of the season there after he was hurt that they lost that dimension. He gives them a real vertical dimension to their offense as if they had enough of it because Rhett Lashley's always throwing the ball downfield. But Maryland has a level of speed that not many other tight ends in the country have. So if he can come back from that injury and get back to the progress he was making early last year as really their number one threat, even over their wide receivers, I think he could have a big year. He's going to be a very important piece in the ACC race and for the Mustangs.
Absolutely. All right, let's get to my top 10 now. At number 10 is the first of 5 transfers on this list, and that is Luke Haas going to Ole Miss over from Arkansas, so staying in the SEC. Now, of course, Ole Miss has 2 really good tight ends. I also consider Daquan Wright for this list as well, but I went with Luke Haas. He has an 82.3 receiving grade across his first 2 years of college football. That's 10th among all tight ends in the nation and 4th among all tight ends that are returning to college football as well. A 147.7 passer rating when targeted. That is the 3rd best among all tight ends in the country in that span as well. Very good athlete at 241 pounds. And how about this, Dalton? He has not dropped a pass yet in his career. So I think Luke Haas probably has a better NFL outlook than Daquan Wright does right now. I think he's got a little bit more athleticism, so that's why he is my number 10 tight end on this list, but he could have a big year next year at Ole Miss.
Absolutely. I think you think about how often Ole Miss gets vertical, and they're going to continue to do so, obviously with Lane Kiffin coaching and Austin Simmons now as the quarterback, but I'm glad you brought up Wright as the complement. Him and Haas are really 2 completely different types of players. You're going to see Wright a lot on the underneath routes and racking up yards after the catch, but Haas is someone who can get down the seams. Like you mentioned, he's a really good athlete. He can get vertical, and I think when you have that dimension with those two guys, possibly both on the field at the same time, Lane Kiffin's going to find a way to use both of them. Because last year, look, we like Caden Prescorn. He had really good hands. He was reliable, but he wasn't the athlete that Haas is. I think Haas is someone who could get vertical in this offense, even flex out in the slot as a receiver a lot and be a really good route runner, while Wright works the underneath RPO concepts as well. I think you've got a pair here of guys in Ole Miss that are going to be really good for this team.
Yeah, really. I think Ole Miss, yes, listen, they lost a lot from their team this past year. Obviously, Jackson Dart, who was a first-round pick at quarterback, Trey Harris, their top wide receiver, as well as gone. A lot of their great defensive players are gone as well, but I still think Ole Miss has one of the best receiving corps in college football. A big reason why is their two tight ends they brought back in Daquan Wright and my number 10 player on this list, Luke Haas. All right, number 9, another transfer, Terrence Carter Jr. going over to Texas Tech from Louisiana. He had an 86.4 PFF grade over the last 2 years. Only Harold Fannin Jr. and Tyler Warren were above him. We mentioned Harold Fannin Jr. and Tyler Warren a lot on this list, considering how dominant they were in college football. So when you're only trailing those two guys, you know you're doing something right. Terrence Carter has been a really good player at Louisiana over the last 2 years, and really dangerous player after the catch as well. He was third among all tight ends this past year with 18 broken tackles after the catch, and he has over 600 receiving yards after the catch over the last 2 years. That's fourth among all tight ends in the country as well. There are only 4 tight ends in America that were more valuable than Terrence Carter this past season, according to our wins above average metric. He's not a dominant run blocker right now, but he's a really athletic tight end, and I'm really excited to see. He's one of the best transfers that Texas Tech brought in, which is saying a lot considering Texas Tech has one of the best transfer portal classes this year.
Yeah, I think if you want a guy that you can give easy throws to and he will make things happen with the ball in his hands, you're talking about Terrence Carter, right? There's also some fun contested catches in his tape as well down there at Louisiana, but I think that, watching him, did he remind you a little bit of Brent Keithy from the last few years at Utah? Just undersized, but a darn good weapon to have, especially making people miss with the ball in his hand. So I think Carter, look, this Texas Tech offense is another one. They want to get vertical. They want to throw the ball deep down the field and throw it a lot. But I think Carter adding in those easier throws, and I wonder if this is a type of player they're really looking for, because you think about them bringing in Jalen Conyers last year, and they didn't use him a whole lot in those scenarios. I wonder if they want a little more speed at the position with Carter. But I think that's the idea there is, again, the RPO concepts, kind of like I talked about with Daquan Wright and Ole Miss. Get him the ball underneath and let him work, because he's kind of like a running back with the ball in his hands.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of Terrence Carter Jr., who's going to Texas Tech from Louisiana. He comes in at number 9 at my list, and at number 8 on my list is the same guy who was number 8 last year. That's Jack Velling from Michigan State. Now, his first year as a Spartan, because he did transfer over from Oregon State last year, it wasn't as good as his year at Oregon State in 2023, but the last 2 years of work is enough for him to be in the top 10 of this list. He has 9 touchdown catches since 2023, tied for the 5th most among all Power 4 tight ends. Nearly 850 receiving yards in that span is 20th among all tight ends in college football. And over the last 2 years, there have only been 5 tight ends in the nation that have been more valuable than Jack Velling, according to our wins above average metric. So Jack Velling, not the best year at Michigan State and East Lansing in his first year there, but he was really, really good in 2023 at Oregon State and was still good enough at Michigan State this past year to warrant a spot on this list.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think what you have with Velling, more so than explosiveness, you have reliability. And you saw the tape at Oregon State and at Michigan State. Reliable when it comes to play action concepts. They can find ways to get him open on the second level down the seams. I thought his route running even got a little bit better this past year, despite some of the struggles of Aiden Childs in the passing game. I think he's still going to be a very valuable piece to this offense, right? They're trying to build this thing out. But Jack Velling is a veteran who's been with Jonathan Smith at Oregon State. He's been with him now at Michigan State for a year. He's got one more year to go, and I think he's just a solid security blanket for Childs and what they're trying to build in that offense.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Jack Velling, my number 8 tight end in last year's list, my number 8 tight end in this year's list. Checking in at number 7 on this list is Miles Kissman from Tennessee. Eli's Volunteers back there. Let's not a woo from the behind the glass back there. But Miles Kissman, man, really interesting career arc for him. So he started off at the JUCO level, then spent 2 years at Alabama as a backup. Then he really broke out in his senior year, transferring over to Tennessee this past year. The 7th most valuable tight end in America, according to our wins above average metric. And he was the 4th among all returning tight ends in that same metric. He's also one of only 4 tight ends in college football with a top 25 receiving grade and a top 25 run blocking grade as well. So we mentioned before, I have a lot of these tight ends are not the best run blockers right now. Miles Kissman is a really, really damn good run blocker. Has not dropped a pass in his collegiate career. And like I said before, he can displace defenders in the run game at 256 pounds. So he's arguably the best blocking tight end that I have in my top 10.
Yeah, he's up there. I mean, he's definitely an awesome blocker, and he gives you kind of that, more of that Kyle Juszczyk kind of feel, because you see him in the backfield as a fullback, leading up through the hole, running counter, running behind those pulling guards and opening things up for Dylan Sampson last year, and he'll continue to do so in the run game. Not the fastest, most explosive guy we have on this list, but Tennessee finds ways to scheme him open, and so often you see defenses forget about him because they're so used to him as a blocker, but that's where it starts, whether he's on the line of scrimmage or in the backfield. One of the best blockers we have in the country, and the type of player that you're kind of glad we have PFF grades around for, right? Because you don't get the full appreciation of him without it. One of the best blockers in the country, and an underrated receiver who they find ways to get open.
Yeah, absolutely. And, without Nico Iamaleava there anymore, they're probably going to run the ball a lot, even after losing Dylan Sampson. So Star Thomas, their transfer running back they just brought in, is going to be a big fan of Miles Kissman. He's going to be a really valuable part of that Tennessee offense. Now they might run the ball a lot more in 2025. So number 7 is Miles Kissman from Tennessee. At number 6 is a guy I think is going to really break out in college football next year. I'm kind of calling my shot with this one. Kenyan Sadique from Oregon. I know a lot of people in the NFL draft community are also big fans of Kenyan Sadique as well. He was the backup tight end for Oregon as a true sophomore last year because Terrence Ferguson obviously is one of the best tight ends in America, just got drafted into the NFL this past year. But Kenyan Sadique had an 80.9 overall PFF grade this past year, 9th among all tight ends in the nation, and he was only one of 2 tight ends in the country with top 15 grades as a pass catcher and run blocker. As also, like Miles Kissman, he's a really good receiver and a really good run blocker as well. The only other tight end who had a top 15 grade as a receiver and run blocker was Harold Fannin Jr. So Kenyan Sadique was the only Power 4 tight end with a top 15 grade as a receiver and run blocker. And despite only playing 350 snaps this past year, Kenyan Sadique was still one of the 15 most valuable tight ends in college football, according to a wins above average metric. So very athletic player, and I think he could become maybe the best tight end in next year's draft.
I'll tell you what, he's already a really good blocker and just has the right aggressive mentality, and Oregon uses him in a variety of ways to even get him out in space as a lead blocker, get him up on the second level, and he just has a level of nasty. You talk about playing to the whistle. Sadique does now. Now, what I like is that he's a former receiver, so you see the athleticism. We saw it in the Big Ten championship game, caught 2 touchdowns against Penn State, right? So
one was a hurdle over a defender, too.
Absolutely. Yeah. You're right, down the right sideline. Yeah, I mean, I saw that again, and I was like, whoa, that's not normal. That's not a normal athlete. But, I mean, you talk about, I think he could even get more receiving work, A, because he's the starter, and B, Oregon also brought in a big 265-pound tight end from Louisville, Jamari Johnson, who could take a lot of that inline work, and Sadique could flex out in the formation more. And look, is he a bit smaller because he's a former wide receiver? Yeah, but he has every bit of nasty that you want as a blocker, and there's a lot of untapped potential as a receiver. I think Dante Moore, when we talk about trying to improve on those underneath throws, Sadique is a guy that he really needs to look for because he's going to be a lot of fun to watch. And remember, too, with Tej Johnson gone, a lot of those slot receptions are going to be up for the grabs. Don't be shocked if Sadique is one of those guys that gets that. I think he's versatile enough to do anything he wants in this offense.
I could see Kenyan Sadique being the second leading receiver on the team next year, maybe behind Evan Stewart. But yeah, I think that Oregon receiving core lost some key weapons, and Kenyan Sadique should be one of the top guys in that receiving core going into next year. So Kenyan Sadique, again, kind of a backup for Oregon this past year, but I really, really do think he's going to have a big breakout year next year and become one of the best tight ends in America and one of the best tight ends in the 2026 NFL draft. So at number 6 is Kenyan Sadique. At number 5, another transfer is Tanner Kosol, who didn't transfer once this offseason. He transferred twice this offseason. So he started off at Ball State, which is why he's on this list. Then he transferred to Wisconsin this offseason. Now he transferred again, going over to the Houston Cougars to catch passes over from Connor Wigman. But he had a stellar junior year at Ball State this past year. No returning tight end in college football was more valuable than Tanner Kosol this past year, according to our wins above average metric. He had 94 catches only Harold Fannin Jr. and Tyler Warren had more catches than Tanner Kosol this past year. And like I said before, those two were superstars in college football. 840 receiving yards were the 5th most among all tight ends in the country. He's 6'7", so he thrives in 50-50 situations. He had 26 contested catches last year. There were 9 more than any other tight end in college football. So he had 26 contested catches. The next closest tight end had 17 in America. So Tanner Kosol, has been a long, winding road for him this offseason, but now he's at Houston right now, and Connor Wigman should be very happy to have him.
And you mentioned those contested catches, 26. That's 5 more than any wide receiver had in the country last year. I believe Jackson Meeks for Syracuse led the nation for wide receivers with 21. No, you mentioned it. 6'7", former 3-sport athlete in high school football, basketball, of course, at 6'7", and baseball as well. And I'm so impressed you mentioned it with his ability to go up and get the football at 6'7". He's going to be a major red zone threat. And his ability to haul in passes that are kind of off his frame a little bit, that are off target, and bail his quarterback out. I think that's such a valuable thing for a tight end to have, especially at that size. We think about so many great tight ends in the past. At that size, you think about a Jimmy Graham and those basketball players that can go up and get it. Kosol is a little bit like that. So he's super reliable. He's got fantastic hands. You can see the three-sport background in his athleticism. I think this is somebody maybe by the end of the year that we're going to be talking about a lot more at 6'7" and the type of athlete that he is. Kosol's a really good player, but I'll tell you what, those contested catches, they're a lot of fun to watch with him because he just goes up and gets it.
And they're going to be valuable next year because Connor Wigman, for as good as he is at times, can also throw some inaccurate balls that you can get bailed out a lot by Tanner Kosol next year. So he's going to be a very valuable part of that Houston offense next year. So Tanner Kosol, originally transferred to Wisconsin, but now he's at Houston going into next year. Checks in at number 5. At number 4 is Justin Jolly from NC State, who was also a transfer, but last year he transferred to NC State from UConn, and he's one of the best receiving threats at tight end despite jumping up in competition level. He had 661 receiving yards this past year, 5th among all Power 4 tight ends, and he was 6th in America with 11 contested catches and 12 broken tackles after the catch as well. And over the last 2 years, he has 1,247 receiving yards. Again, only Harold Fannin Jr. and Tyler Warren had more than Justin Jolly over the last 2 years. An elite athlete, not the biggest right now. He's only 6'3", 235 pounds, but he can separate at an elite level. So again, his NFL evaluation might be a little tougher because he is a little smaller for a tight end, but as a college tight end, which is what we're ranking here today as college tight ends, he's absolutely one of the best in America.
Yeah, NC State's leading receiver last year, and when you talk about the guy who kind of fits that Harold Fannin Jr. mold as smaller center of the offense who can break tackles after the catch and even get vertical a little bit, you're talking about Justin Jolly. You mentioned the missed tackles, another guy kind of like Terrence Carter earlier who's like a running back with the ball in his hands, right? You just find ways to get him the football, and he's going to make things happen. Solid speed, solid tackle breaking ability, and I think somebody, with kind of, especially with the question marks that NC State has at receiver this year, would not shock me at all if he was their leading receiver again. Kevin Concepcion's gone to Texas A&M, so, with NC State trying to figure out what their offense looks like, Justin Jolly's the most reliable part of that.
Absolutely, yeah. He's an elite receiving tight end. Like I said before, he could separate at an elite level as well. Kind of got some Colson Loveland separation ability to his game, but of course, Colson Loveland's a little bit bigger than Justin Jolly, but still really one of the elite separators we have in tight end in the nation right now. At number 3, yet another transfer on this list. That is Max Klare going to Ohio State from Purdue. He is back home in his home state of Ohio. He's actually from Ohio originally. Really productive year at Purdue this past year. 684 receiving yards in his redshirt sophomore season, the 4th most among all Power 4 tight ends, and the 2nd most among returning Power 4 tight ends as well. He had 34 combined receiving first downs and touchdowns that are tied with Eli Stowers for the most among returning Power 4 tight ends. He was the clear-cut number 1 receiver for Purdue this past year. He will not be that at Ohio State, which actually might even help him out a lot more now. Defenses are not keying in on him because obviously Jeremiah Smith, the best player in college football, is there. Cardinal Tate, who a lot of people think is going to be a first-round pick in the 2026 draft at wide receiver, is also there as well. Brandon Innes is there. A bunch of other highly touted recruits at receiver are there at Ohio State. But Ohio State, for the first time in a little bit now, has a legitimate superstar tight end.
Yeah, and it's not even just a superstar, but I don't remember the last time. I know, I like Cade Stover. He was a 4th-round pick, good player for the Houston Texans, right? Jeremy Ruckert was more of a blocker. They've had NFL tight ends, but I don't know that they've had a tight end, at least in a long time, as athletic as Klare is. He's just a really good athlete. He can line up anywhere on the field and run routes from anywhere. He can get vertical. I think, you mentioned it, you have Jeremiah Smith, you have Carnell Tate in the outside, maybe Brandon Inniss in the slot, but if Klare doesn't get a lot of attention from that inline spot, you're going to have a problem, because now you're talking about another threat that can get down the seams and hopefully can help out a little bit more as a blocker. Last year they used Emeka Ibuka a lot in that role, but I think Klare could be that guy. He's a dangerous athlete, and you tell me, you're the expert here on the history of it, but when is the last time Ohio State had an athlete like this at tight end? Because he's one of the best athletes, maybe the best athlete at the position in the country this year.
I'm literally looking at it right now. They have not had a second-round pick, because they did have a few third-round picks at tight end, but I'm looking for a second-round pick right now. Jeremy Ruckert was a third-round pick, the last third-round tight end they had. So they had day 2 tight ends before, but I am struggling to find a second-round pick at tight end, which is what I think Max Klare can be with a big year next year.
His athleticism is, I think, on a different level. And I know some of these other guys are smaller, so they're really good athletes, but as a guy who you could project out as an NFL tight end, he's a real deal athlete. He's a problem, and if Brian Hartline finds the right way to use him, I mean, you already have enough problems with Smith and Tate on the outside, and we know Ohio State will still find a way to run the ball. And depending on what their quarterback situation is, Klare could be an extremely valuable piece for this team. This is a dangerous group of weaponry once again.
So I believe the last time they had a first or second round pick at tight end was back in 1996 when Ricky Dudley went 9th overall to the Oakland Raiders. So it's been a long time since Ohio State's had a legitimate NFL prospect at tight end, and I think that Max Klare could absolutely be that for them next year. So I'm really excited to see what Max Klare does. And like I said before, he went from being the number 1 without a doubt weapon at Purdue last year to now being at least the number 3 weapon at Ohio State, which actually might help him out a lot considering how much attention is going to be paid to Jeremiah Smith and to Carnell Tate. And honestly, Dawn, I just want to say, poor Purdue fans, man. Every time they have a really, really good football player, he always enters the transfer portal. You got Nick Scorton obviously going to A&M. You have Dylan Thieneman going over to Oregon. Max Klare going to Ohio State. Will Helt went to Clemson as well.
Well, and look at those schools you're talking about. These are guys who are plenty talented enough to play at schools like that. And Barry Odom's going to try to keep more of those guys at Purdue now. But it's tough when you're not winning ball games in the era of the transfer portal now to keep these guys. You got a talent like Dylan Thieneman on a team that won 2 games last year. He's going to look to go win ball games before his career is over, right? So I think that's what it's about more so. We're seeing that now at a school like, right on the south side of the state in Indiana, where it's, hey, this used to happen to Indiana too. That's why Michael Penix went to Washington, right? Mm-hmm. But if you win ball games, guys will start coming in. So I think Barry Odom, obviously, that's the first thing he's going to be concerned about there is winning, and then those players start sticking around.
Absolutely, yeah. Purdue's had some great players recently. Just unfortunately, a lot of them have ended their careers at a different school. But a lot of them have gone to an elite school, which just shows how good these players are. So Max Klare checking in at number 3 on this list. And the 5th and final transfer checks in at number 2. That is Jack Endries, who is now at Texas after transferring over from Cal. He started his career as a walk-on at Cal, actually, and now he's one of the best tight ends in the country entering his redshirt junior season. He has over 1,000 receiving yards over the last 2 years, 6th among all tight ends in the country, and the most among returning tight ends in the Power 4 as well. Jack Endries, very strong hands for the position, only dropping 1 pass in 2024 while catching 9 of his 12 contested targets. So he transfers over to Texas. He actually just transferred recently to Texas. He's part of the spring transfer window. But Jack Endries, man, in a Texas receiving core that loses some key pieces, they get a big-time one in Jack Endries, and I think Arch Manning's going to have a lot of fun throwing this guy up the teams next year.
He's going to get a lot of targets, and I think sometimes, I do this on the NFL show a lot. I go, why does this staff want this player? You kind of get a feel for what types of players that coaching staffs looks for. I think Steve Sarkisian has a type at tight end. Gunnar Helm's super reliable last year. I think Jack Endries could be an even better version of Gunnar Helm, where you have the reliability. He's got fantastic hands. He's a solid route runner, especially in the intermediate game. I think he's going going to fit in seamlessly in this Texas scheme, because we've seen before. We've seen it with Jatavian Sanders. We've seen it with Gunnar Helm now. Now we're going to see it with Jack Endries. They find ways to get their tight ends in optimal spots, right? The play action game, at times in the RPO game. I think Endries is a more traditional route runner like Gunnar Helm was, but a better version of it. This is someone who went to the exact perfect situation for him. I think with Arch Manning, especially with Manning, look, still in his first year as a starter, still going to want some of those easier targets underneath. Yep. You're going to get that from Endries. And again, he's so reliable. He's got spectacular hands. He's going to pick up a lot of first downs for the Longhorns.
Yeah, for a receiving core that lost Matthew Golden, that lost Isaiah Bond, as well as lost Gunnar Helm. Obviously, a lot of questions that receiving core. Now, a lot of talent that's still there. Ryan Wingo should have a big breakout year next year, but you add one of the best tight ends in America, and Jack Endries. It's a very reliable security blanket for Arch Manning next year. And I think Jack Endries could be one of the top tight ends selected in next year's draft as well. So number 2, Jack Endries transferring to Texas from California. And at number 1 is Eli Stowers from Vanderbilt. And I believe, Dalton, it's the first time ever that a Commodore is the number 1 returning player on a PFF list. So a shout out to Eli Stowers right there. Eli Stowers, really interesting career arc, actually. Started off as a 4-star quarterback coming out of high school, went to Texas A&M, switched positions, transferred over to New Mexico State, and he's made that transition to tight end look seamless, then transferred over to Vanderbilt last year with Diego Pavia, his former teammate at New Mexico State. Now they're teammates over at Vanderbilt as well. Over the last 2 years, he is the most valuable returning tight end in college football, according to our wins above average metric. He's an elite athlete. He's above the 99th percentile in our game athleticism score metric as well. Very, very dangerous after the catch with that elite athleticism. Third among all tight ends in the Power 4 with 13 broken tackles after the catch, and he's fourth among all tight ends in the Power 4 with 373 receiving yards after the catch as well. He, alongside Diego Pavia, is one of my top 10 quarterbacks in college football. That's the best quarterback-tight end pairing that we have in the nation right now. So Eli Stowers, it wasn't a slam dunk, open and shut number 1 overall here, but I kind of knew going into this list on that Eli Stowers was going to be my number 1 tight end in the country.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at his athleticism and the story, it's a cool story. I believe it was actually that he still went to New Mexico State at first as a quarterback. Mm-hmm. And then Diego Pavia beat him out for the job, and he moves to tight end. And it's just been incredible to see. He showed it in flashes at New Mexico State under Jerry Kill, who also went with them to Vanderbilt as part of the coaching staff. But he really showed it. 300-yard games last year and a 93.9 receiving grade against Alabama. Took over that game, refused to be tackled on first contact. And I think that's the fun part. The combination of the athleticism, the youth at the position, and only in going into his 3rd year playing the position. It's not like he played in high school. You mentioned he was a 4-star quarterback. And then the ability to break tackles. I just think Stowers is such a great movable chess piece in any offense, and especially in this offense that's so centered around the run game. You can find ways to scheme him open. He's athletic enough to get himself open. He can work anywhere from either sideline. He can work vertically down the field. He's just got a little bit of everything. You know, he's got to get bigger and got to get better as a blocker and a little more polished, right? I mean, it's someone you talk about for the future that is such a raw athlete and has not played the position for very long at all, that you go, wow, what could he be moving forward? Because he's already, if we're already calling him the best tight end in the country, he's not even fully polished yet. He's nowhere near as developed as he could be yet. So he's still going to be a big centerpiece of this passing game with Pavia and the Commodores. You know, we'll see what they can find outside of him with some threats at receiver, but they're going to run the football and they're going to throw it to Eli Stowers, and rightfully so, because he's a dynamic athlete at this position.
And like I said before, right now, I don't think there's a first-round tight end, but if anyone's going to emerge as a first-round tight end, like you said, it's probably going to be Eli Stowers, because he's already the best tight end in the country, and he's an elite athlete at the position as well, who still gets so much better considering he hasn't really played tight end that much. It's a great point by you. It's also Eli Stowers, for the first time ever, a Vanderbilt Commodore, is a number 1 player on a PFF returning list. Eli Stowers checks in as my number 1 tight end in college football. Just to kind of remind you guys, and go over for the audio-only listeners, what my top 10 was. Honorable mention was R.J. Maryland from SMU. At number 10, Luke Haas transferring to Ole Miss from Arkansas. Number 9, Terrence Carter transferring to Texas Tech from Louisiana. Number 8, Jack Velling from Michigan State. Number 7, Miles Kitselman from Tennessee. Number 6, Kenyan Sadique from Oregon. Number 5, Tanner Kosol transferring to Houston from Ball State and also Wisconsin this offseason as well. Number 4, Justin Jolly from NC State. Number 3, Max Klare from Ohio State, transferring to Ohio State from Purdue. Number 2, Jack Endries, transferring to Texas from California. And at number 1 is Eli Stowers from Vanderbilt, Dalton. So anything you want to change in this list? Anyone I left out of this list? Anyone should be a little higher or a little lower? What do you think about this?
No, I think it's a good list. There's a couple of projections here, especially on the back end. I'd say, especially when you talk about somebody like Sadique taking over a starting role, or Luke Haas and what he could be at Ole Miss is really enticing. Especially a guy we mentioned earlier, Daquan Wright, is a really good pairing for him. And I think the two notable guys, and maybe it's one, maybe it's two that were left off of here, were the two Georgia guys, Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky. Both of them showed flashes last year, but the entire passing game didn't click, so it's kind of hard to tell with the two of them, one, which of them is going to get more targets, and two, just what this Georgia passing game is going to look like. Those are the two that stick out, but there's some other good players that, maybe aren't on this list right now, and deservingly so, but could work their way in there. We wonder what, Khalil Dinkins has over there at Penn State. Penn State, obviously a long lineage of good tight ends. Matt Lauder at Boise State's a good player. Ben Bramer from Iowa State, right, with them losing their top two receivers. I think Bramer needs to be a big part of their passing game in order for Rocco Beck to keep the success going that they had last year. But no, I think this is a really good top 10. I really like this top 5. The top 5 here, I think especially Stowers and Klare, when we start talking about NFL prospects, those are the two guys that I look at that I go, if I was gonna take a shot, like you mentioned with Stowers, at who maybe just has a shot at being a first-round pick with a big year, the two guys I would look at are Stowers and Klare.
Yeah, Ben Bramer was a guy that was really intriguing. He got hurt this past year, which is why he didn't make this list, but he had a really good year the year before, so he could absolutely become a top 10 tight end again next year. Penn State's actually really interesting. Khalil Dinkins is a good tight end for them. He's probably going to be the backup, though. There's a lot of talk right now that Luke Reynolds, the true sophomore, is going to be a starting tight end for Penn State. He was a really highly rated recruit coming out of high school, so excited to see what he can do in that Penn State offense next year. The hardest one to leave off, I believe, though, was Daquan Wright. Daquan Wright, really talented player, has over, I believe, 760 receiving yards over the last 2 years. Is a really, really good number for a tight end. So, very good player. He still actually might be the starting tight end at Ole Miss, but I just think Luke Haas is a little bit of a higher ceiling than him.
Sneak peek, just with those two being in the same room, because here's the thing, if you put them together at 10, they're actually better than number 10, right?
Right.
It's the two of them. Where, and we'll get to the full episode later. Do you have your tight end units rankings? Oh, no,
it's receiving core.
Oh, it's just part of, they're lumped in with the receivers. Okay, because if you put the two of them together, that's among the top 3 or 4 tight end pairs in the country, probably, right?
Yeah, at least might even be number 1.
It could be. There's just not a ton of teams with 2 great tight ends. That you just don't see it too often, especially with the transfers, right? And 9 of your top 10 guys have transferred at some point in their career. Kenyan Sadique being the only one, because clearly he's got nowhere better he's going to go than Oregon. So I think that's the interesting part too, is we're not seeing it like Iowa used to have, right? When they what was that year they had they had Fant and who was
Hawkinson.
They had Fant and Hawkinson on the same team. That's right.
2 first-rounders on the same team.
Yeah, we're just not seeing, or like even Laporta. I think Laporta and Lachey at some point were on the same team in Iowa.
I believe so,
or no, all maybe Eric. You're just not getting teams with multiple tight ends like that. So Lane Kiffin must really have a plan for these two guys, because I will say they're 2 very different players that could both exist in that offense.
So I'm not ranking tight end rooms, but I am doing receiving course, which we'll actually do on an episode in this on this channel very, very soon as well. Ole Miss, spoiler alert right now, is one of my top 5 receiving cores in the country. Big reason why is those 2 tight ends.
You got these 2. You got Dejon Stribling, I love, coming in from Oklahoma
Harrison
State.
Wallace.
I mean, they're going to. Austin Simmons is going to have plenty to work with at Ole Miss, and these 2 guys are going to be a big part of that.
Absolutely, yeah. We'll get to that a lot later as well. Once we're done with the positions in college football, we'll get to the position units in college football as well. But next up, next week, will be our top 10 offensive linemen in college football entering the 2025 season, meaning tackles, guards, and centers all combined into one list. And then once we're done with that, we'll move over to the defensive side of the ball as well. So make sure you guys subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of those top 10 lists coming out very, very soon. For producer Eli back there, for Dalton Wassman, I'm Max Chadwick. We'll see you guys next week with the top 10 offensive linemen in the nation entering the 2025 season.